Well, I have a feeling that between these two gentlemen, I do not have to prime the pump very hard. I do have some questions, but that's just to get us going for a few minutes. So let me begin with the first one. Donald, you were born into the world of New Orleans jazz and have achieved the distinction of being an NEA jazz master. But Stephon, you came to jazz somewhat later than Donald, but you both share a deep and profound connection to this music. So what's the origin story of your collaboration?
Well, for me, I was reading something about quantum theory, and I saw things about four-dimensional space-time and the slit experiment. And to me, it seemed like it was some of the things I was doing with music. And then I came up with some other ideas based on that. And I recorded a recording called Quantum Leap. And I was looking up, just Googling quantum theory and jazz. And lo and behold, the first person that popped up was Stephon Alexander. So as you can tell, many musicians are students. So I started studying Mr. Alexander, found him to be most intriguing. And in my mind, I said, this is my guy. So I sent him an email hoping that he would respond. And he did get in touch with me. But then a great friend of ours, Ray Thomas, really linked us up. And we've been running full speed ever since. And every time I talk to him, I tell him this: you have given me so much more to ponder, but I really appreciate it because that's what I love to do.
Well, I was on a college campus outside of Philadelphia, and I get this email in my inbox. It was the year 2011 or something like that. It goes, "Dear Professor Alexander, I am Donald Harrison." I'm like, the Donald Harrison? Wait. I was just listening to this guy in Miles Davis' album the other day. And he's talking about quantum physics. And for a couple of years before that, I was pondering writing a book. And I was afraid to write the book because, oftentimes when we think about things like physics and jazz, you don't want to put those things together. They don't really fit in the same box, stereotypically. So I was afraid to write that book. But then when I got that email from him, I was like, I need to start writing this book right now before this guy writes a book. So that's kind of like an important thing there. But I think I couldn't have had a better person to validate what we have come to discover. And it took from 2012 to now, and you all will be the first to hear what we've come up with.
We're all looking forward to it. So let's talk a little bit about inspiration. And I know that both of you have been inspired by jazz antecedents. And Donald, you've said that you were inspired by the music of Charlie Parker and Miles Davis and Louis Armstrong. And Stephon, you've written at great length in your book about the inspiration you've gotten from John Coltrane's music. Can you briefly discuss the degree of influence that these your jazz forebears have had on you?
I'll say a little about Coltrane because that's where, a lot of my book is about Coltrane and about his actually fascination with Albert Einstein. The tradition of jazz, and of course, y'all should be very proud Charlie Parker is here, right? This is, Kansas City, I was interviewed by the BBC not too long ago, and I said, the three greatest intellectual accomplishments in the last century was Einstein's theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, and Charlie Parker. Right? No, it's you can Google it. And actually, what I say at that level carries a little bit of weight. actually really meant that, and I spent many years really looking into this, and and but Coltrane, I think, really epitomizes it, because Coltrane it didn't stop with him just mastering the harmonic and the tradition. He had to go beyond. It was about going beyond, breaking new boundaries. And where he went to, he wanted to bend space-time. He wanted to bend people's consciousness, and he became basically a scientist by studying Einstein and taking his stuff to the next level. And it's in that tradition which is holding to the tradition of jazz, which is it's an experimental scientific thing, as well as an artistic and a musical expression.
Well, for me, all of those gentlemen that she mentioned and hundreds of others, their mission is to capture the universe in the sound of jazz and to be the best that they could be. And one of the statements that one of the conclusions and statements that I make about that is that the greatest musicians, especially jazz musicians, are inclusive of everything. And that inclusivity leads to exclusivity in their sound. But the thing that they all share in common is what Charlie Parker said, and this is why science and everything else is part of what we do, and John Coltrane studied everything, is that they teach you there's a boundary line to art, but there is none. So that helped me to realize not to leave a stone unturned. So when I found this, I went full steam ahead, trying to forge where this should go. And I think scientists also understand that you have to look into everything. And you speaking about Einstein. Einstein used music as a source to calm him, to get him into, I guess, a Zen state of the scientific point where his mind could be free, like we do with music, to see things that you normally can't see. So we're all using this to see things that we normally can't see. The music opens your mind naturally, and science, I think, does the same. So we're simpatico in that. And I know that we've found some new areas, very difficult music that feels natural and subtle. Some kind of way we found the right way to make that happen right now. And with me, I can feel when something else is about to happen. I can't explain the phenomenon, but I can feel I'm on the verge of something. And we've already found some things, but I know we're on the verge to something. And the collaboration is going to lead to new ways to look at things. It has to. One of my basic things I tell my students is 1 + 1 is always going to equal 2. So you have to change the equation to find the next step. And we're changing the equation.
You know, I couldn't have asked for better setup to the next question. I'm going to skip over question 3. If we have time to come back to it, I will. But seeing as how you brought up math, it's been noted in many places that many musicians are also good mathematicians, and obviously geometry and algebra are important to physics. But Stephon, you've said that there's a deep connection between geometry, algebra, and music. And can either or both of you explain the connection between math and jazz and why your collaboration is useful to explain both jazz and physics to people, to educate them?
I'll start with a just brief answer. We've spoken about, he can further elaborate, but music is math. Music is science. We have songs based on the double diminished scale. And we liken that. Can you get the next slide? We analyze that to say that
So that's your prop right there.
That's the quantum knot. But that has all the permutations. But we liken that to various ideas in quantum theory, which he's going to elaborate on. But the two chords inside of the double diminished, and then you can further permutate that to 4 chords, and there's all these different ideas, which is represented by this knot inside of that. And then he's making me do the lecture. No, I'm gonna turn it over to him. I'm gonna turn it over to him. Go ahead, you talk about it.
No, so that's a beautiful thing about this. I mean, like I'm selfish. I mean, I'm a scientist for a living. I have to do that that's how I make my money. Donald plays for his money. But he actually helps me become a better scientist. I feel like I have an unfair edge because everybody else in my field, they're doing their thing, and I talk to Donald, and then he opens me up in these other creative ways. So yeah, this whole thing, that's interesting. This right here, the knot, this is a piece of something called an atom of space-time. So I work on something called quantum gravity, which is a theory that tries to unite Einstein's theory of relativity with quantum mechanics. This is the next frontier. I don't want to know what kind of technology we're going to get out of that one. Jump space-time and go to other universes and weird things like that. But Coltrane was trying to do that in his playing, actually, him and Wayne Shorter. That's a whole nother long conversation. That's another like 5-hour discussion. But the point there is, again, we have this bicameral situation where we want to put science in a box and we want to put like music in a box. Like, the creation of what we call Western science started with music. It was the first science. It goes back to the Pythagorean and the Egyptian mystery schools that Pythagoras went to. So we're very confident in terms of like how we think about music. And the thing, when I told Donald this, Donald was like, oh yeah, Miles, when he was working with Miles Davis was the one that was telling, I'm not supposed to say that yet. I can say it? All right. There's some things that I can't talk about. He's gonna like take my head off. So I was like, yeah, quantum permutation, like how these patterns interweave in the quantum world. And Donald was like, well, yeah, it's all natural. Say quantum mechanics is natural. It gives birth to life itself, right? Quantum biology, good. So, and then I was like, yeah, this kind of stuff. And then he goes, Miles Davis exactly taught us how to play that way. And I'm like, to hear it from the guy that played with Miles Davis, again, it was very vindicating because I felt so alone as a scientist, having these ideas. And then I go to, and we were talking about Art Blakey, when you played Art Blakey, same thing about the rhythm stuff that we will be playing with the time stuff that you're not going to play tonight because it's too difficult. But anyway, yeah, so the thing I think that's wonderful about this is that it's helping me grow as a scientist and actually discussing and engaging in this project, this collaboration with him over the years. It's helped me become a better scientist. You think it's going to make you a better musician?
Yeah, it's definitely going to make myself a better musician, and
also a better musician.
Yeah, and it's pushing the musicians. This is what we shouldn't be saying, but we'll say it. You know that when you found a new space where you're forging ahead, when the music is too difficult for the musicians to understand what's going on. So we're at that point right now, but they will understand because we're going to keep working on it, and then it will become natural for them. When you're in the face of something that wasn't here before, and it's not in the textbook, and it's impossible to notate with the system that we have to notate music, then you know that, okay, something else is going on here.
And it's very much part of the tradition.
Yes, very much part of the tradition is to move forward for the betterment of humanity and the world. I just want to say one thing before the next question, is that I was talking to Stephon, and he was telling me about, well, I had to look at the slit experiment, but he told me about the fact that electron, I was saying something about music, and he said it's like the electron at the quantum state, it's everywhere at once. So I was like, that's what we do in jazz music, because you have to understand everything. And I further thought, and we discussed this again, this is my man right here. He gets me straight. Anyway, we were saying that in the mind, it actually has all of these ideas inside of it. And with the slit experiment, my analogy was that when we play that second, that moment, that's when it's like a series of slit experiments. That's what you hear at that moment. So we're making choices. And I think every human being does this. For all the information that's inside of your mind already. You know, you have all of this information and to make this decision at this moment. So we do that all day, every day. So it's not only, I think, have we found new ways to look at what we're doing in our areas, we found other ways to explain what we do as human beings.
You know, my last question is basically a question that's already been answered. So I'll ask it anyway, but you can disregard it and use it as an opportunity to say anything else that you would like to tell this audience. So my question, should you choose to answer it, is, you know, given all of the influences that affect jazz, you know, Afro-Caribbean, European, Dixieland, ragtime, on and on and on. And aside from the other jazz musicians we've discussed this evening, what else can you say or would you say has influenced you in your compositions and your improvisation? And you can answer this or not, or just say anything you want to say.
Donald Harrison is influence.
Okay.
Well, of course, Stephon Alexander has influenced me. But the notion, I'll just say one more thing about, and talk about the last thing I talked about, was that I was fortunate to have Charlie Parker, again, influence of Charlie Parker. He has a way of making quotes that are concise but tell the whole story in 2 seconds. He said, if you don't live it, it won't come out of your horn. But then, and I read that in high school, and I took that as my call to arms to play, that I could play with the whole legacy, every era of jazz musicians, all the master innovators. So I went about that task as a student in high school. I was fortunate that I came up in New Orleans so I could play with all the people, not all the people, but some of the people who actually were playing jazz music in the 20s and get those lessons, cultural and musically. I was fortunate that my father was chief of what I call Afro New Orleans culture, and he had the understanding of what was happening in Congo Square and the connection to Africa and to what I call antiquity, the beginning of human beings. Then I went about the task to play with musicians who were playing in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, up until now, and gather all that information. So we play from the perspective of having lived all the music and learning from all the great masters. And that changes how you understand the music. And tonight you're going to hear that I've been teaching these young musicians. We're going to play music from the 30s, from the 40s, and we're going to skip the 50s tonight, the 60s, to show that these guys are on that path and that they have the idea of what the electron is, and they're playing.
Okay, that sounds like That sounds like my cue to leave the stage.
Well,
Yep. Okay.
it may be our clue to leave the stage and come back in another suit with our horns.
All right. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.